You're listening to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo, Andy Hughes, and Samantha Powell.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf. It's a personal and professional growth podcast exploring the intersections of passion, potential, and purpose. I'm Andy Hughes, and alongside me here is Denise Russo and Sam Powell. We thank you very much for joining us here today. We are on many different platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We really thank you for joining us here today, and we'd love it if you could subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. And trust me, we have a lot of great content coming up here, not only in this episode, but also in future episodes. And again, today we're going to be talking about another principle in the book Coach Wood and the 7 Principles That Shaped His Life and Will Change Yours by Pat Williams. Today's principle will be about make friendship a fine art, which is a really, really interesting topic. And I'm excited to be back, Denise and Sam. I had a brief vacation recently, and I know that you guys were doing some fantastic episodes as well. So I'm really, really happy to be back. It's amazing the power of just even a small vacation, even if it is over like a long weekend or whatever it may be. So I'm really, really happy to be back. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to be back.
So good to have you back with us, Andy. And in fact, it looks like on your trip that you were with friends.
Exactly, I was. It's a perfect segue into this particular chapter. Yes, I did go along with some friends on vacation. And to be honest with you, I haven't had too many vacations like that in the past. This was something pretty cool. So it's kind of good timing for us to be talking about this particular topic. Great timing. So as I said, though, this principle is Principle 5, make friendship a fine art. And there's a lot to unpack in this, and we're about to here in this episode. And we highly encourage you as well to look at the book too, because there's a lot of great things to look at in addition to the discussion that we're having today. So friendship, it's something that we've all had in our lives, whatever you define friendship as, but it has to be a fine art. And that's something that we're going to talk about. So there's actually a good quote that I found where it was talking about how, like marriage, friendship must not be taken for granted. It requires a joint effort, right? It's not something where maybe one friend is communicating a lot and the other isn't. It requires both friends to make that commitment. And this really resonates with me, not only on a personal level, but also I think on like just in a work level as well. You know, when I think about friendship and just connecting with people, we've talked about that in previous episodes too, connecting with people, right? It's just so important to have that effort, because I actually had previously in a long time ago in a previous job, I had a manager who just wasn't making that effort at all. And it was very, very clear. We would never have one-on-ones. It felt like there was almost like a wall between me and my manager in a way. And so I know a lot of times in like leadership, sometimes open door policy is something that's brought up quite a bit. That was not the case. It felt like there was just a wall between me and the manager. Wasn't getting feedback. If I was, it was, very just like yelling, and he would be watching YouTube for most of the day, not sharing his knowledge. So I don't know, it wasn't a good relationship at all. And to me, that really, really impacted me in a very negative way, because it made me feel like I wasn't valued. I wasn't really growing. I didn't feel respected. And so that is so important when it comes to not only, like I said, your personal life, but business as well. And I had the opportunity, you may have heard me talk about this in a previous episode. So if you haven't heard this story, definitely check out this episode. But about a couple of months ago or so, I got the chance to go to a baseball game with people on my team that I hadn't met before. I had met them virtually in the past, but I had never met them in person. And so it was really cool, because honestly, like it felt like I've known them for years. I mean, I've been talking to them, but the reason is because both of us put in effort, right? They are very open with me. I'm open with them. And so having that joint effort is just so crucial, not only in your personal life, but also in work. And, as I was reading that, I was just thinking about that manager that I was referencing earlier and how that impacted me, because it made me feel like I wasn't valued. I wasn't really, it was hard to go to work in that environment. And so having an environment where you have that effort from both sides, I mean, really, it's just an amazing feeling. So that was just something I wanted to share just right off the top, because that really just got me thinking when I was reading that. So do you guys have any kind of like similar stories to that, or what were your thoughts on that?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's so interesting that you jumped right. Like, this is a chapter about friendship, but the story that kicked off in your mind was about this work relationship, right? Because when we think about friendships, similar to relationships, and I love that quote that you did, but I think that that's so interesting. It's funny. It reminded me as you were telling your story, I was actually recently talking about Denise to somebody because Denise and I have met in person one time, and it was, I don't know, years ago. It was the very first time we ever met. We didn't know each other, had never even had a conversation. We met, spent like 2 days together. I mean, we connected, and like there was definitely like that spark of like, this is one of my people type of things. But I would say like we cultivated this relationship and this friendship that we have over this virtual connection, right? And so like, Andy, as you were telling your story about, going to the baseball game, I think about how many people that I have deep friendships with, especially from work, that I've never met in real life. People who have changed my life, I've never sat down with in person because they live on the other side of the planet, or people, who I've mentored or helped or things like that, right? Same thing. Like we've never sat down and we've met. And so I think it was so interesting that like we're talking about friendship, but you jumped right into like this work thought process. Denise, I know you have lots of thoughts on friendships and work and things like that. That's so interesting to me.
Oh gosh, I could talk about this part for days because a couple things come to mind. One is we've never met Scott in person, and he's our producer, so he's not on camera with us, but and sometimes you hear his voice and sometimes you don't, but he's so integral to our show. And Scott is on his way to Disney World. So if you've listened to any of our recordings, you know how much I love going to Disney World and Universal Studios in Orlando. And so I'm going to meet Scott and his family with my family for the first time next week. I'm so excited. Awesome. And it's really interesting to be able to not only share your time at work with people, but to share friendships that extend beyond that. So many of my very closest friends from work know my children. They've watched my children grow up. And for me, this week has been a really interesting one for me. It would have been my 15th anniversary at the job that I was recently displaced from. And so over the past week, as I've been thinking back on all of the things about work, like who were my managers, what were the jobs I had, what value did I get out of the things I learned from, and in every story that I was thinking of along the journey of 15 years, it always lent itself back to people that I became friends with. And so it was really interesting as I was putting a post out about leaving my job, that there would be no possible way for me to acknowledge every person that had an impact in my life. And I remember years ago when I was in college, when you're young, okay, and we talk about our kids a lot on the podcast too. When you're young, you think, oh, these are the kids that'll be my friends forever. And then you go to middle school and you meet new friends and you think, oh, these are the kids I'm going to be friends with forever. And then you go to high school and then you go to college and then you go to your job after perhaps job. And I have a friend, one of my best friends from college, who is still my friend today. And he said to me in college, I was going through a transition where I was feeling like this one friend that was my one friend was now no longer going to really be an integral part in my life for multiple different reasons. And my friend said to me, Denise, sometimes friends come into our life for seasons and reasons. We don't know how long the season will be, and we don't know what the reason will be. But if you could cherish the moments that you have with people at those particular times, then that's what's most important, is making each day your masterpiece, like Sam and I recently shared in the chapters before this. And in the book, it talks about in this chapter, do we all have deep lasting friendships, or do we merely hang out with a bunch of shallow, superficial acquaintances? And Joshua Wooden, who's also Hugh, who is John Wooden's dad, he gave this advice to his son, and he wasn't saying just make a lot of friends. He said cultivate close, meaningful relationships and work at being a great friend to others. And what I found interesting about that quote in the book was that Hugh Wooden was first a farmer. And so he knew what it took to cultivate and what it meant to sow and reap and harvest. And he used those analogies from running a farm to teach his children how to have close, meaningful relationships and what the fruits of that labor would be like if you did that.
Yeah, I love that. And we had talked about that part of this book before, and that, the deep lasting friendships. And the thing that came to mind is tying back to, Andy, thinking about work and thinking about relationships. And I think about leadership. And there's, I was recently, as I walk my neighborhood, I like to listen to podcasts, and I've been going back through podcasts that are just on my shelf of things to listen to. But the one I was listening to very recently was Brene Brown was interviewing, who was it? It was Michael S. Irwin, who wrote Leadership as a Relationship. And it's that thought process, and it's about building really deep, lasting relationships with people. And part of leadership is sitting in that space, but really part of friendship and what Brene Brown is all about is vulnerability. Am I getting to the depth with this person? Am I sitting in a vulnerable space? And the people that you've gone through that with and who have done that, and that right after what you're talking about, Denise, it says, friendship is giving and sharing of yourself. And when I think about that, I think it's about sitting in depth, sitting in each of you being in that vulnerable space of this is who I am. This is, you've gone through, good and bad and ugly and all the in-betweens together. But that, I don't know, that there's something about that that's really beautiful. And I think about the title of this chapter is that make friendship a fine art. And Denise, you're talking about the masterpiece thing. There's a tie together here. If you're going to make each day your masterpiece, part of that is helping other people, giving of yourself to other people. But when you're talking about that in the context of friendship, it's that where do you get to the beauty? Where do you get to a fine art? You get that in the depth, in the in giving of myself, and also of receiving too. I mean, that's the flip side of this. It's sometimes hard for people. It's the people pleasers, right? Like, I can give to you, but you also have to be in a place. If you want a real, true friendship, you've also got to be a receiver and let somebody give to you. And that's, that's people sometimes.
Dale Carnegie wrote a book about this called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And if you think about it, the three of us have learned directly from John Maxwell. And John Maxwell teaches that leadership is about influence, nothing more and nothing less. And if you think about what does that have to do with friendship, it gets me to think about a couple of things. Number one, I've been watching Stranger Things with my kids. Like, I haven't watched it. The 5 seasons were over. My kids made me binge watch it. I had to look through like my fingertips because some of the scenes are a little bit scary for me. And what struck me was that you can be a leader through fear or through love. And so when you're talking about even the story you were just sharing earlier, Andy, it got me thinking about this television show where there is a character who is like the football captain, and he had his little crew that followed him around everywhere, but they followed him through fear. They didn't follow him through love. And there's another character who used to be like the head of the basketball team or was like a competitor to this other guy. And through the storyline, he learned the power of love and being there for people. And it wasn't until the end of the final episode of, which I think is season 5, because now we're waiting for season 6 to start, that it's all about love. And there's another really good book that's written by Joel Manby, who used to run SeaWorld. And it's called Love Works. And as I was thinking about what you were just saying, Sam, there's some parts in the book that struck me based on the stories we're telling today, which is that Pat Williams outlines greatly that Friends complete us. They go through tough times with us. They're good listeners. They make others feel important. They call their friends by name. They devote quality time to building quality friendships, and they care enough to confront you when you're going astray. And so, as I was thinking about what you were sharing and about the beginning of this chapter, it really takes someone who has a deep, close relationship with you that can do all those things. And I know, Sam, for you, there's a few stories throughout the book that have struck you with a relationship, probably the most important human relationship that John Wooden had. Do you want to tell more about that?
Yeah, the part that I love and the part that I really, really like, but it comes up throughout the whole chapter and it comes up through the whole book, is that John's best friendship, right? His best friend was his wife, Nell. And the end of this chapter is the fine art of resolving conflict. If you're going to be friends with someone, you're sitting them in the good and the bad, and you are resolving the problems that come between you. But there's the story of Nell that flows through just the entire book. And you really gain, if you read the whole thing, how much deep affection and love and friendship, John and Nell held for each other. And I mean, I legitimately was in tears at the end of this chapter, like reading about his friendship with Nell. And there are two things that I have highlighted in this part. And when we think about deep friendships, we think about getting to that level. I think it sums it up really well. And the one is Nell had written a card to John that said, "Don't try to understand me, just love me." And, I think that's, if you can sit in that space, I think about that with leadership, right? If we can sit in this space of affection, of love, and, spaces like that, you don't really have to fully understand somebody. It's great if you take the time and you get that deep, and you really, really do. But if you can sit in that foundation of love, it's really something beautiful, and it'll help you resolve, conflicts as you get to there. But the thing at the end, and this is how the chapter ends, and we'll get back on topic here, but some would say that John Wooden was lucky to have married his best friend, but I don't think luck had anything to do with it. I'm convinced that John and Nell worked very hard at making their friendship work. Their love outlasted life itself, because John and Nell made friendship a fine art. And so when I think about that, right, like friendship isn't an easy thing all the time. Do you have friends that it is easy? Like, absolutely, right? Like, for sure. Those are your kindergarten friends, absolutely. But as you get older and as your life gets deeper and richer, friendships become really complicated. We hurt each other deeply. We go through really big things together. And the fact that, like, and thinking about it as work is really interesting to me. I don't know. What do you guys think about that friend, that concept of like a deep, meaningful friendship that is a fine art takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too, just kind of going back, even like if you think about it, like as a kid, you always want to have like so many friends. And even in like the social media age that we're in, people are like, "Oh, I have all of these friends. Look at how many friends I have." But really, how many of them are actually like deep, Yeah. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that, as you are on a full-time job or whatever you're doing, like you don't have a lot of time. And so you really have to dedicate time to those people that, you really want to be deep friends with, and so it's interesting how as you grow older, things change, because I remember as a kid, just thinking about it, like, I want to have a ton of friends. And I think that's really popular now on social media. People just want to say, "Oh, look at all these friends I have," but how many of them are actually friends, and how many of them actually are good friends that really want to learn? And it's the same thing with like what you were saying with like relationships too. It takes time. Both parties have to be involved in that. So that's also something I just thought of as you were talking about that.
There's a proverb in the book. It talks about how iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And when I was first learning that verse a long time ago, when I was younger, I was like, well, how can that possibly be? Like, how can you take this one instrument and strike it against another instrument and it not destroy the first instrument? Like, how does iron sharpen iron? And one of the things I learned in sort of my science nerdiness, I suppose, is that if you want to sharpen raw metal, it has to encounter another substance that is harder and applied at the correct angle and at the correct shape and at like the correct movement to be able to sharpen. But the funny thing about it is that iron can rust. And if you have rust and you strike rust on iron, both of the pieces will decay. And so when you're thinking about the importance of having quality friendships, and you were just mentioning this, Sam, like what happens if you're in an environment where you don't resonate with the culture? What happens if you're around people who are like rust? What happens when you're not the one that's the sharp iron?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I remember my dad's a teacher. He's taught every grade, I think, at this point. But that was I don't remember what phase it was in my life. Maybe it was in high school or something. Like he really stressed the value of who you surrounded yourself with and who your friends were. At my wedding, that was one of the things he said in compliment about my husband, was that like, I can tell you're a good person by the relationships you have with your friends. My husband, I don't know, like I'm just kind of amazed. He has this friend group that they've been friends since high school. And like, they're still, they're going on like some of his friendships are like 30 some years long, that span all these stages of life. Like I don't have very many friends like that. Like I can't, like deep connections that really follow along. And who you surround yourself with is really key. And my dad always said that like, that was one of his big indicators, like when watching kids in high school or kids on his sports teams or whatever, like who they associated with was kind of one of the indicators of like the trajectory they were on, right? And they could get onto a better one and they could do whatever, but that who you put around yourself, right? Is it rust? Is it sharp metal? Is it at the right angle? Is it all that stuff? Like that really is key to, to life and, what that looks like. They teach that when you're becoming an entrepreneur. I've been doing a bunch of trainings and things like that. And that was one of the big things is go find the people who are doing the things that you want to do, right? They're going to help level you up. They're going to help you grow. We tell that when we do leadership development, go get a mentor who's been there and done that. And, but cultivate those friendships, cultivate those relationships, because who you have, really makes a difference.
Yeah. And what you were saying, Andy, earlier about like the likes and the friends on social media, there's a lot of downsides to social media, but there can also be some really good things too, because, Olivia and Vincent recently, my kids, they were like, Mommy, Facebook is for old people. However, I guess that's the category I fit into because I've been able to find friends from my younger days, because I remember the day that email wasn't even invented yet. Like how crazy to even say that, right? But I do remember the day it was invented while I was in college, or at least it became popular when I was in college. And I have a friend who was my best friend when I was in second grade growing up in Western New York. And I moved away when I was 16 in the middle of 11th grade and moved to Florida. And I never thought or knew how would I stay in touch with this friend, because, you had their home phone. Back then phones were like the dial phones even, right? And so I knew how I could reach this person based on their old phone number. But then time goes on and time passes, and we were able to reconnect through the power of the internet. And not only that, but it was almost like we were able to transport instantly 30 years in time back to our youth. And we aren't just best friends again. We've always been that, but there was that gap in time that was just lost for a little while, and how important it is for us to not take for granted the time that we have with the people that we care about the most.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I have similar experience, like some friends that live out of town, right? And, sometimes I just don't really see them that often. It could be 3-4 years go by, and, then I see them and we just kind of pick up where we left off. It's like not even like there was that gap. So yeah, it's cool. And I think, Sam, kind of getting back to what you were saying too, like about just like in the workplace. I know Coach Wooden, he didn't really believe that he needed to be buddies with his players, but he was really, really making sure that his players knew that he was genuinely interested in them, not as just players, but as people. Denise and I, we actually had a podcast where we talked to Clint Hurdle, who used to be a baseball manager, and he kind of had a similar thing where he was talking about how he's not teaching them to be better baseball players. They've played baseball players their whole lives, right? I'm sure, I mean, obviously, yes, they want to win games, but he's also trying to teach them to be better men, better fathers, better sons, whatever, better brothers, whatever it is. And so that really resonated with me as well. You really have to understand what, like if you are a manager, you really have to understand what each person is after, right? Like what are their goals? Where do they want to go? In order to really show that interest, you have to fully understand them and where they want to go so that you can step in and say, hey, in order to get to point B, here's what you need to do, and so on. And so that was really interesting to me as I was kind of looking at that.
So, Andy, when we were off mic, you were talking about how did Coach Wooden teach his players that through the pyramid? Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, the pyramid of success. And that's something that we can also link out as well to the group here. I believe that was that a book as well that was out as well, I want to say. Yeah. So there's a lot of great tips in terms of like the pyramid of success. And we can link that out. But yeah, in terms of what was said, he talked about keeping a close relationship, but keep their respect, be interested in the problems, and be easy to approach. We talked about like that open door policy earlier. It kind of goes hand in hand with this. Maintaining discipline, right? Be fair and lead rather than drive. That was something that was said. He mentioned study and respect the individuality of each player and handle them accordingly. I think that's another thing too. Everybody is a different person, right? And so you kind of have to treat them as he or she deserves to be treated. So that was something as well. And try to develop the same sense of responsibility in everyone. And then the last one was analyze yourself as well as your players and be governed accordingly. So that's another big part of leadership too, right? Is not only obviously you're focused on your team, but your team isn't as good. It's not going to be good if you're not doing what you need to do and kind of analyze yourself and keep yourself accountable as well. So all of those things that really adds up. And so those are just some kind of tips that were laid out. It can be tough for sure, but there are ways to practice this. And those are just some of the things that were brought up there.
We actually offer assessments and consultation and coaching on human behavior through the Maxwell method of DISC. So if you're listening and you're a leader or even an individual that just wants to know more about yourself and how to work best with others, reach out to us at School of Thoughts on our LinkedIn page, School of Thoughts Publishing, and we can get you information about DISC. Sam, you and I were a part of a class that I was teaching years ago on emotional intelligence. And we can also deliver that to you and your teams if that's something that interests you. If you're looking for ways to not only increase the intelligence of your team, but the emotional intelligence and even the positive intelligence of your team, because that together is, like you're saying, Andy, the holistic effect of having the most successful teams.
Mm-hmm. When I think about, right, like that emotional connection and things like that, right, when I think about friendship in that regard, the more emotionally intelligent I am, the more I understand emotions, I understand and can sit in true empathy with someone, I can really get to a deep, lasting friendship, right? I'm not going to sit in judgment of you. You have a different life path than I've had, but I'm going to sit in curiosity. I'm going to sit in the space of really trying to understand the path that you've walked and love you just the same and walk through it. And, we see that in like that's such an important skill in leadership. In the same podcast I was just listening to with Brene Brown and this leadership as a relationship, forget exactly the story, but it was something along the lines of the guy who wrote the book. He works a lot with military, and one of the classes that they were running, Renee and this guy were running together, had a military branch in it, maybe the Air Force. And they were saying that like trust is, obviously something we have to be successful on missions and things like that. But it was affection that they were really striving for, right? Like leadership at that affection level, friendship at that affection level, right? When we think about those relationships, we think about that. I think about in the emotional intelligence space, is you have to really be able to understand somebody, to understand your own emotions, understand why you're each feeling in a certain way, so you can get to that depth, you can get to that deep, deep level of affection that drives the richness in a relationship and in a friendship. And this book goes on, this chapter goes on to talk about that good friends know how to go through tough times together. And Denise, you and I have been through some tough times in our lives. We've shared stories about those in the past, but there's a quote in this book from Henry Nguyen, and it says, when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find that it's those who, instead of giving advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, or who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares. And so when I think about depth, I think about that. I mean, I have this whole section highlighted because it calls to, like, me at such a deep level. We lost our youngest son a few years ago in 2020, and grief is so complicated and tough. But the big thing is the amount of people who showed up for us, and they were work friends. I mean, like, I don't know how many times I told people, we're like, oh, what can we get you? Like, our friends, our family right outside of work, we're like, can we get you meals? Can we do anything? It's like, no, literally, like, our work friends have done all of this stuff. We had a meal trade. We had, gifts sent to our oldest son. We had all of this, love and support and this depth. And this just, like, I don't know what to say to you. I don't know what to do for you. I just know that I'm going to show up, right? I'm just going to show up and hand you a meal. It's in the middle of pandemic too, right? Like, I'm going to show up, hand you a meal with a mask on, and then walk away. And like that depth of love. And like, I loved that description of, like, sometimes the best things you can do for your friends, and you really get to that richness, is nothing but sitting quietly with them. I mean, I'll never forget, like, the random cards I would get 6 months later out of the blue from someone that, like, I would consider a friend, but like that just showed up in this moment quietly, easily. Hey, I'm just thinking about you. You're on my mind all the time. Or, hey, I have no idea what to say to you. I could just kind of come sit with you. Like, yeah, let's do it. Let's sit on the back porch together and maybe talk, maybe not. But that sitting in that space, and those are the people that you really often remember in the end of things. Those are the people that, like, you can sit in silence with this person. Like, that's a real friendship. We don't need to say anything. We don't have to fix anything. Whatever the brokenness is in this moment, it just is. And here we are together. And, like, I don't know, like, to me, those are one of, like, those litmus tests of true friendship, is those who show up in those dark times. And Denise, you've been going through, a few things with one of your friends.
Yeah, true friendship is what you're talking about here. And for me, listening to your stories instantly make me think about another friend of mine. So I mentioned the one friend, my friend Jason, who said that you have friends for seasons and reasons. And sometimes you don't know when those friends will come back around in your life. And we, both of us, have another friend, Wendy, one of who I would consider the closest friends I had in college many years ago. She was the type of person in college that was always there, as what the book says, is to be an encourager, be a cheerleader, tell your friends you believe in them. Like, if I could name one person that did that for me throughout my college journey, it was my friend Wendy. And we were great friends during our time in college. And same thing happens. Like, again, we didn't have social media then. And so we lost a little bit of touch. And then we reunited later. She got to meet my family and kids, and same for me to meet her family and her kids. And this past November, I found out from her that she was going to be struggling with a really difficult and challenging diagnosis of cancer. And it hit me in ways that are really hard to describe in the moments that we only have left for our time together today, other than to share with you that it's been a profound touch to my heart about who do I want to be as a friend, and how can I show up for her, even just minutely as much as she did for me. So each day I have tried my best to either be there and silently just praying for her, or sending her a note to just say, I'm thinking of you, I love you, sending her songs that maybe make me think about her during the day. And I remember one time she sent me a note that just said, you don't know how much these these posts to me really mean to me. And I wrote back to her and I said, you don't know how much they mean to me. It's changed my life. It's changed my heart. It's changed the way that I view what true love means. It's changed the way I think about the value of friendships and the value of investing time, and that time waits for no one, and that we don't know what tomorrow will bring, whether it's for her or for one of us on this call. If you're listening and you're a praying person, I would love for you to think about Wendy, because we will covet any prayers that you're willing to give for her and her sweet family. The chapter says, above all, tell your friends how you feel about them. Don't save your eulogies for your friends' funerals. Whatever ought to be said, say it now. Tomorrow might be too late. And I remember a couple years ago, a friend of mine, my friend that said the Seasons and Reasons, he and I were invited to, unfortunately, attend the funeral of someone else that he and Wendy and I were friends with, also from college. And time had passed. Again, I didn't have time with this other friend while he was still alive to just say how much he meant to me or how funny he was, or to share memories of our past. We got to say it all at his funeral. His family got to hear the stories, but he didn't. And so the fine art of choosing friends wisely and being able to cultivate those friendships and being able to make sure that you make moments matter are what I really took away from this book. There's a story that comes shortly after this where Pat Williams talks about interviewing an author named Steve Reed, who wrote the book, The Suffering Clause, A Leader's Surprising Secret for Outlasting Tough Times. And in the course of interviewing him, Steve told Pat about a story he told his son, Zach, about the important lessons of the fine art of friendship. And what Steve told his son was that genuine friends lift each other up. They don't drag each other down. True friends bring out the best in others. And so if we were to just think about the summary of what we've been talking about today, it's about not being too proud to let friends help and to simply be there for them and always protect their reputation, be quick to forgive and ready to forget. That's an important one, is that to forgive and to be quick to forget, to be an encourager and a cheerleader, to tell people that you believe in them. And above all, tell your friends how you feel about them. And so for me, that's what I took away from this chapter. I think we're at the time now where we can share our accountability for next time. For me, I think I'll say that the accountability for next time is for me to make an intentional, good, solid effort to be there for others, but also be willing to let others help me when I need help and not just think I can do everything on my own. And so over the course of the next week, I think I'm going to take to heart that I have had a couple friends reach out and say, hey, how can I help you in this time of transition that you're having? And at the same time, I want to make sure that I am there continuously for my friend, Wendy, in every moment that she has to celebrate life while we have it together here on this earth. Sam, how about for you? What did you take away from the book, or what's your accountability for next time?
Yeah, I think there are three thoughts going through my mind. Is one, it doesn't have to be that complicated when it comes to connecting with people, right? Just sit with them in honesty and reality and sharing of your life, right? Sometimes we overcomplicate, especially in the hard moments, that we need to say the right thing or do the right thing. But in the reality, as somebody who's been through some of the worst, it's just showing up. My grandma has a saying of just do what your hands find to do. And that is true in friendship. And, so that's one of the big thoughts in my mind. The other thing that was, you were talking there, Denise, that I thought of was, when we talk about telling somebody what they mean to us, sometimes it's hard, especially friends you've been friends with a long time. It's really hard sometimes to know, to easily articulate, why am I friends with you, right? Like, what is it that, is about that? And there was this exercise that Simon Sinek has. He has a book called Find Your Why. It's about finding your purpose statement, kind of essentially in life. But there's this part of the exercise that is sitting down with your friends and you ask them the question, why are you friends with me? And then everyone goes, well, I don't know, right? It's like that. But the question you then ask them is, what is it specifically about me that makes you show up when I call, that makes you show up when I need something, or go to dinner with me every week, or would drop everything if I needed to. And so I'm thinking about that as you're talking about, really letting people know what friendship means to them is sometimes you have to be able to articulate what that means. And so I think that might be something that I do in this next week is think about that specifically. Think about some of my really great and close friends and get down to that articulation. What is it specifically about this person that has made me show up for 20 years in a row? And then, and then if I can say, oh, they're funny, then okay, well, what about them? Like, what about them being funny really connects with who I am and it connects with my soul? And like, if you can ask that kind of question enough times, you'll really get down to like, I really connect with this person because they're funny. And because they're funny, it makes me feel like I'm not alone in the world, right? They see things that I see and get the same enjoyment. And like, that's why we're friends. And that's the beauty of it. Or I'm friends with this person because they are my greatest cheerleader. They're the person who yelled at the cop while I was speeding. Leave me alone because I'm so great and I don't deserve this, right? The crazy ride or die. Like, what is it specifically about the people? So I think I'm going to spend some time really thinking about that so that I can, get better articulation to give people that meaningful, like it's not that complicated, but give people that meaningful why you're important to me.
I love that.
Amy, what about you? Gosh, I'm thinking about Scott again. We're keep missing Scott. I've done that 3 times today.
We do miss.
Yeah, I guess I'm just missing Scott, or I'm just jealous of his trip to Orlando here. But Andy, what about you?
I am jealous of that. Yeah, I'd love to go to Disney.
I know.
But no, I love what both of you said. First of all, definitely thinking about Wendy, Denise. Definitely, that's definitely something. And yeah, it's interesting what you said, Sam, too. I feel the same way. Like I have so many friends that they've either been in my life for a long time or maybe they're recent. But one thing I'd like to do is just appreciate them and let them know how I feel. I think that's something I need to do better at, just saying, hey, you've done this and this and this for me. I really appreciate you. I think little things like that, even just sending an appreciation, even if it's just a message, it can go a long way. I know when I get something like that from someone, it's very, very powerful. And it really just brightens my day. And I want to do that for other people because I know that all of us are busy. We all have different things that we're doing. But if we just dedicate, even if it's like 10 to 15 minutes in a week, just to maybe send something to somebody saying, hey, I really appreciate you for being here and being my friend. Let's talk soon, or, just something like that to reach out to different people. I think that's something that I would like to do because I just think that little things like that can really make a big impact, even if it's just a small message. So that's something that I would like to do this week.
That's awesome. So Andy, what do we have coming up next?
Yeah. So we, like I was saying earlier today, we've had so much good content. Definitely check out all of the episodes that we have. The next one is going to be about another principle called build a shelter against a rainy day by the life that you live. And so we're going to have a lot of really good content on that one as well. I don't know about you guys, but I've really enjoyed just going through these. I feel like each principle that we've talked about so far and also in the future, they're just so interesting, and they're also relevant to both not only life at work and things like that, but also in our personal lives. And I think it's really cool. I feel like it relates to so many people and our listeners. And by the way, our listeners, we'd love to hear more from you guys on how this series and how this podcast has impacted you. And we hope that you can take some action items of your own. That will be the next one. So we appreciate everybody that's listened to this episode as well as any other episode. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we are on a lot of different platforms. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, many other ones. We highly recommend that you subscribe so that you don't miss any of these episodes. We're coming out with an episode every week, so you always have plenty of material each week to go through. So we'd love to hear from you as well. If you have any suggestions, comments, anything that you'd like to share with us, you can go to the School of Thoughts website. We're on LinkedIn as well. So there's a lot of different ways to reach out to us and let us know. So we thank you again for joining us here, and we will see you next time on the What's on Your Bookshelf podcast.